Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. The Timberwolves fell to the Heat in extremely disappointing fashion on Monday night. We're going to break down the whole thing, including the disaster of a turnover fest that it was. But the Wolves did well offensively, who actually did play well for Minnesota. And what does the rotation, the lineup look like down the stretch in this game? What does that mean moving forward? Those decisions that head coach Chris Finch made down the stretch. We'll revisit it all here on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Tuesday, everybody. This is the post-game podcast. It is a not-so-happy Tuesday after another disappointing Wolves loss. That's 3 in a row for the Wolves. And frankly, this was the road game the Wolves had the best chance of winning against the shorthanded Heat team on Monday. We'll break it all down here on the show today. What went wrong? What are the few things that went right? And really what happened down the stretch with the lineup, the rotation? What does this mean moving forward? Et cetera. We'll get to all that. A big thank you here off the top, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, from Apple to Google to Spotify to Odyssey and beyond. You can also watch this show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. You can download that on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So Wolves Heat on Monday. Miami is missing Jimmy Butler. They're missing Bam Adebayo. Both players were questionable coming into the game. Adebayo had played in the last few for Miami. I think he has a shoulder, and he played heavy minutes in their loss on Saturday. Saturday or Friday? Friday, I think. So he'd played recently. Butler sprained his ankle during their loss to Indiana. So, I mean, no Butler, no Adebayo. Really, their two best players. I know Tyler Hero's been playing better lately, but Adebayo and Butler are their two best players. This is a game the Timberwolves should have won. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And if you only look at like part of the box score, I talked about this with Marnie Gellner on the live postcast that we do after each game. Like if you're looking at most box scores, like the left hand side, right? If you compare the team's field goal percentages, 3-point percentage, free throws, even rebounding, like you'd feel pretty good about the Wolves, and you'd say, okay, they probably won this game, right? The Wolves shot 54.4% from the field. Miami shot 46% from the field. The Wolves shot over 44% from three-point range. Miami was 26.5%. The Wolves made 15 threes. Miami only made 13, but the percentage was 44% to 26.5%. Free throw attempts. The Wolves were 9 of 14. Miami only attempted 8 free throws in this game. The Wolves made 3 more free throws than Miami. It was a relatively clean game from a foul shot and officiating perspective. Total rebounds. The Wolves were a +4 on the glass against Miami, which I talked on the show Monday, previewing the matchup like, hey, Miami's not a great rebounding team. The Wolves should be able to hold their own on the glass. And they did. They were a +4. The Wolves had 4 more assists than Miami did, right? And so you'd feel okay about this game. But then as you venture to the other side of the box score, you see the 22 turnovers by the Timberwolves to only 9 for the Miami Heat. And there's your game story. The Wolves only lost by a possession. In fact, if you didn't see the end of the game, the Wolves had a chance to tie the game. They actually did okay execution-wise in the final minute or so and had a sideline out of bounds play with 2.5 minutes left, or 2.5 seconds left with a chance to tie the game in the front court right after calling timeout, which they almost messed up, by the way, because Naz Reid started to advance the ball up the floor before the Wolves got the timeout. But they got the timeout. They inbounded the ball in the front court with 2.5 seconds left. And, actually, really credit Miami. I thought the play call wasn't terrible. Miami did an outstanding job sticking to their guys, fighting through screens. The Wolves had a couple of kind of half-hearted screens that were set. Miami stuck with everybody. Ant fell over. And Jaden McDaniels inbounding the ball, missed an open Naz Reid in the opposite corner, but the play was to either go to D'Lo or Ant pretty clearly, and neither one of those guys was really open. The ball eventually got to D'Lo, but he had to try and step beyond the arc with the ball. The ball got knocked out of his hands. Really good play from Kyle Lowry, kind of doubling off of guarding the inbounds passer and McDaniels to knock the ball away as D'Lo was trying to kind of catch and step back in one motion. So that was actually, to me, more, it was better defense than it was bad offense by the Wolves, better defense by Miami than it was bad offense by the Wolves. And this game certainly had both of those things. But so many of the Wolves' 22 turnovers were completely unforced. I haven't gone back and watched them all yet. I don't know that I'm not recommending anybody does do that because it's going to make your eyes bleed. But I guarantee you, of Ant's turnovers, Ant had himself 8 turnovers in this game. At least 3 were traveling. D'Lo, I don't think had any traveling calls. He typically doesn't travel all that much. I think his were all live ball type turnovers. I think once he threw the ball out of bounds against the zone early in the game. But so many of these turnovers were completely unforced. And credit Miami for switching, between zone and man and making things somewhat complicated at times. But for D'Lo and Ant to combine for 4 more turnovers than the entire Miami Heat team in this game is just absurd. Like, you can't have that happen. And yet the Wolves shot the ball so well, they only lost by 3. It's so disappointing to lose a game when you shoot the ball so well and have such strong moments on that end of the floor to then just have these careless possessions. And Marnie and I talked about this too. This wasn't a game necessarily like so many early in the season where it was like a complete and utter lack of effort, lack of care is what it seemed like early in the season. I didn't get those vibes from this game. I just got careless vibes, which I guess is the exact same thing, just said in a different way. But you know what I mean? Like, those are 2 different things, right? I felt like the team wanted to win. It was just on the occasional, or far too often on a possession, it was like, I'm just gonna throw this ball here and see what happens. And there wasn't like purpose to everything that was happening. I thought they competed defensively. I thought they mostly competed on the glass. I thought that they moved the ball well on offense and sometimes were overpassing, and that was part of the problem. But especially the Ant turnovers were just kind of lackadaisical mistakes. And I don't think I'm not suggesting he doesn't care. I'm not suggesting he wasn't playing hard. I'm just saying that it's attention to detail, right? It's a carelessness more than it is a lack of actual care, if that makes sense. That's what it feels like. There's a lack of intention to everything that Ant is doing, or Ant did in this game. And yeah, the line looks good otherwise. Like, I mean, sure. Makes my job with studs and duds later in the show a little more complicated. He had 29, 7, and 6. That sounds great. Shot 11 of 16, 5 of 8 from outside the arc. Great Ant game, right? 8 turnovers to 7 assists. That's not exactly a Tyus Jones-esque ratio, right? That's not what you want. D'Lo was a little better, 8 assists to 5 turnovers. But again, D'Lo, so many of his turnovers were actual live ball turnovers in the middle of the floor, leading to baskets the other way. Here's another way to look at this. Miami attempted 102 shots in this game, 102 field goal attempts to the Wolves 79. Miami had 13 offensive rebounds, which was an issue. That's something else I wanted to talk about. Miami was a +5 on the offensive glass, but it wasn't straight second chance points and putbacks necessarily. It was just the fact that they got so many just extra shots up at the rim, didn't shoot the ball well, and they didn't convert all the Wolves turnovers into points immediately. Like, they played faster. Miami played pretty fast in this game, but it wasn't like a constant bombardment of dunks and layups and cherry picking in the open floor. It was more just the fact that Miami was able to get up 102 shots in this game and shot, under 30% from 3. What was the exact number? 26% from 3. Is that what it was? 26.5% from 3. Also Miami, well, actually, I'll talk about that next. But that to me was the biggest thing, right? 102 field goal attempts. The Wolves 79. The Wolves again turned it over 22 times. Miami only 9. And then I mentioned the offensive rebounds a moment ago, 13-8. Like, how do you shoot 54% and lose a game? Well, that's how, right? You turn the ball over like crazy. You give up offensive rebounds. And you just give the other team that many more additional opportunities to score baskets, and that's exactly what happened in this game. All right, I want to talk about a couple more things, key takeaways from this game, a little bit about the rotation at the end of the game. So we'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our presenting sponsors over at Prize Picks. If you had taken Rudy Gobert points over, you would have been in bad shape on Monday between Wolves and Miami. Rudy did not have a great game. We'll talk more about that too. If you had taken Naz Reid points over, I think he would have had a great game. He had 21 and 11 off the bench. Prize Picks is a ton of fun. You just go over there, you pick 2 to 6 players if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection. And there's tons of categories too. It's not just points, it's field goals made, it's three-pointers made, steals, assists, I think even turnovers. And plus you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. They offer projections on any sport that you watch. That, of course, includes the NBA as well as NFL. You can cross sports. You could have done Monday Night Football and the Wolves at the same time. You can do NHL as well, college football. It's bowl season, college basketball. Whatever you want to do, they have it at Prize Picks. You can make your entries in 60 seconds or less. It really is that easy. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, they'll give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, a couple additional takeaways in this one. I mentioned the offensive rebounding already. I mentioned the turnovers already. The rebounding in general already. There really wasn't much good there. In terms of the Timberwolves defense, I thought at times they played okay. They did a really good job on Tyler Hero. I talked in the preview show when I was previewing this matchup on Monday's episode, like, hey, if the goal should be Tyler Hero and the 3-point line, and the Wolves should win. Well, they did what I wanted them to do, and they didn't win for all the reasons we already talked about. Miami shot 26.5% from three. Tyler Hero was 0 of 8 from three, and he'd been awesome lately from deep. And sure enough, they didn't have anybody else that really provided offensive punch. They scored 113. They had 5 guys in double figures. Max Struss had 19 points on 5 of 10 shooting. Kyle Lowry had 18 points on 16 shots. They did okay on those guys. But then Tyler Hero, 14 points, 8 assists. It took him 19 shots to get his 14. Didn't get to the line at all. It was 0 of 8 from 3, but he was 7 of 11 on 2s because he was able to get downhill, hit floaters, got to the rim a couple of times. Really, the floater game is what killed the Wolves, especially late. Rudy Gobert really struggled to step up and guard that floater. And it was weird. Like, typically, Rudy does a pretty good job at doing that, closing out on guys in the mid-range, guys shooting floaters. And that just didn't happen in this game. Rudy really, really struggled defensively. And then late in the game, Chris Finch actually benched Rudy Gobert. I don't know, benching is maybe a strong word because he didn't simply not play the rest of the game. But with 5-6 minutes left, Rudy was on the bench in favor of Naz Reid. And I talked about this with Barney too. I think that had just as much to do with how good Naz was playing as it did with the struggles that Rudy was having. You go back and watch, Naz was doing a great job at contesting drives to the paint, at getting in the way, showing, basically saying like, hey, I'm here, slowing the drive down, and then still closing out to the corner. And that's something Rudy's actually usually really good at, especially for his size, using his length to contest jump shots, being active defensively, being able to simultaneously guard a floater and also get to the corner and contest a jumper. He couldn't do that in this game. It was like he was just a half step slow or whatever that was. Rudy it was disappointing, to say the least. So down the stretch against a small Heat team, of course, no Bam Adebayo, no Bam Adebayo, no Jimmy Butler. So, I mean, not that Butler's scoring a ton in the paint as much as he used to, but he still does. That's a huge part of his game. Even though the 3-point shots kind of resurfaced for him this season compared to last year, but the Heat should have no business being a plus 12 in the paint in this game. And they were. They outscored the Wolves by 12 in the paint, despite the fact the Wolves had Rudy Gobert and Naz Reid had 21 and 11. But the Wolves could not score in the paint. They couldn't stop the Heat from scoring in the paint. And Naz was actually the one who was active defensively. Typically, I clamor for Naz to play less because I think he struggles, in the past. Certainly not the last few games. I've of course argued the opposite more recently, because Naz has improved so much defensively. He's still a liability at times, but if you go back and watch in this game, Naz showed not just the ability and the nimbleness and the quickness for his size to contest and recover and X out and, block shots on the move, all those things that he's shown flashes of, but also the wherewithal to be where he needs to be at the right time. We haven't hardly ever seen that from Naz. And he seems to truly grasp the concept now of what his role is in the defense. And he played minutes both with Rudy and without Rudy in this game. And with 5-6 minutes to go in what was at the time, I think, a 2 or 3 possession game, head coach Chris Finch said, "Hey, I trust Naz Reid to give me enough on offense or to help the offense, which Rudy was not doing in this game, and give me enough defensively, play the right scheme or play within the scheme, make the right decisions on the fly, just as much as I do Rudy Gobert," which is worrisome, right? Because what does that say about Rudy? What does that say about it is a bigger conversation, but the trade, what does it say about the status of the team? Like, here's another thing. I don't love individual game plus minus, but it's here. We're going to talk about it. Naz was a plus 13 in this game, one of only 2 Timberwolves players in the green in terms of individual game, individual player plus minus. The only player that was negative double figures, Rudy Gobert, minus 14. I want to go back still and look at their minutes together. I actually think they were probably a slight positive together in this game. But Rudy was a minus 14. Naz was a plus 13. And I don't know. I hope that Chris Finch didn't just like look at the stat sheet midway through the fourth quarter and say, "Oh, okay, well, the plus minus," I don't think that's what happened, because the eye test could tell you just exactly that, right? This is one of those cases where the plus minus matches perfectly with what the eye test would tell you from watching this game. Rudy looked, I don't want to say he looked lost, because Rudy knows what he's doing defensively, but he was a half step slow, a half step disinterested. I don't know what it was. The defense was not there for Rudy Gobert. Naz Reid competed defensively. And I mentioned the points of the paint earlier. There's no reason that the Wolves should be giving up 15, 9, and 4 to Orlando Robinson in 27 minutes. Like, good for the guy, right? I'm happy for him. 15 and 9 to Orlando Robinson, 7 of 9 shooting, 7 offensive boards against Rudy Gobert in 27 minutes. Gobert had 7 defensive boards. Gobert had 10 and 8 in 31 minutes. Orlando Robinson, 15 and 9, plus 4 assists in 27 minutes. Orlando Robinson outplayed Rudy Gobert. Naz Reid outplayed Rudy Gobert. I mean, fill in the blank. Nikola Jovic played almost as well as Rudy Gobert in this game. He was effectively the starting center for Miami. There's no reason that Gobert should have played the way that he did in this game. And you know, you could say it's a straight matchup thing, right? Like, Miami's playing small, so we're going to go small with Naz at center. But the whole point is the Wolves should be able to go big when other teams are going small, right? The Wolves said that till they were blue in the face after the press conference after this trade in the offseason. Since then, like, hey, we're just going to force other teams to have to deal with our size. Now, obviously, there's no Karl-Anthony Towns. That certainly impacts the decision-making in this game specifically. And you have to play, you can't be completely matchup proof, right? As a coach, you can't be so stubborn to not say, okay, this isn't working, or I think this could work better. And so, good for Finch to do that here. It's in some ways similar to benching D'Angelo Russell for Jordan McLaughlin late in the playoffs last year against Memphis, right? Not exactly the same, but there's similarities. Like, it's a rough look. It's rough that that's what needs to happen at this stage. Now, all the things I always say on the show apply. We're late December. I'll remind you again, the Boston Celtics were below 500 and reeling at this time last year, went to the final. Not saying the Wolves will go to the finals, but things can change. Things can change in a hurry. Towns will come back, all those things. There were positives. We'll talk about studs and duds here in a minute. But to have to bench Rudy in a 2-3 possession game down the stretch because he's just not cutting it defensively is not a positive thing for the Timberwolves. It's not a great look. Okay. Let's close the show by doing individual studs and duds like we always do. There's some positives here. There's some positives. We'll talk about those here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is presented by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for really all sports, all pro and amateur leagues out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball, both pro and college. I don't know, hockey, you name it, they've got it at betonline.net. The Wolves will not be favored. I promise you they won't be favored for Wednesday's game in New Orleans, but go check out the line there and see which direction you want to go for Wolves Pelicans. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline too. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's talk individual studs and duds. This is a little tricky. This is a weird one because a lot of Wolves shot the ball pretty well in this game. But like, I can't sit here and give Anthony Edwards a stud. I get that he was the most impactful offensive player for the Wolves, but he was impactful in a negative way too. He turned the ball over 8 times and traveled a million times, it felt like. Like, I can't give him a stud in this game. I just can't. I'm actually going to go Jaden McDaniels. We already talked about, we'll get to Naz too. Obviously, he's going to get a stud too. But Jaden McDaniels, I want to talk about him. 16 and 4, 3 assists, a steal and a block. I thought he played well. He did a great job when he was matched up with Tyler Hero. 6 of 9 shooting, 2 of 3 outside the arc. He looked very comfortable early when Miami was playing zone early in the game, and I thought he was a big part of the Wolves kind of busting that a little bit. This was a nice Jaden McDaniels game, and I talked about him extensively on Monday's show as being the primary culprit in terms of not rebounding the ball. Now, he still finished. Only D'Angelo Russell had less rebounds among Wolves players in the starting lineup, and that wasn't great. Like, he's got to get more than 4 boards, but he had a couple contested ones in this game, and I wanted to just like bottle that moment and say, hey, Jaden, like, this is what you need to do is use your size, your athleticism, your length. Just go up and get a defensive board, push the ball up the floor, be the Scottie Pippen that Chris Finch thought you would be, 18 months ago when he made that comment infamously. I think it was at the Minnesota State Fair. Like, I remember it that well, right? We think he's Scottie Pippen. He didn't say exactly that, but that was the gist of it. Be that player, right? Or be a fraction of that player, but the consistency is still not there. All that to say, good game for Jaden, 16, 4, and 3, a steal, a block, 6 of 9, shooting 2 of 3 outside the arc, 2 of 2 at the line. And hey, an even plus minus in the starting lineup, which one of 3 starters to be even or better. So a stud for Jaden McDaniels. Naz Reid, of course, 21 and 11, a good game for Naz, 2 assists. He got a little overzealous. I think he started feeling himself a little bit, jacked up a couple threes real quick. Not even completely open. Like, typically to this point, he's shooting threes when he's wide open, which is great. But I don't know that we need Naz contested threes all the time. Still, good game for Naz. This is unlike, I'm at the point now, this loss got me swinging negative here instead of just being my typical measured self. This was a good game from Naz overall. 21 and 11, 2 assists, 8 of 15 shooting, 1 of 4 outside the arc, 4 of 5 on free throws, and a team best plus 13. Nobody else is better than a plus 8 in this game for the Wolves, as I mentioned earlier. So nice game from Naz Reid. My third stud, it has to be Austin Rivers, and it's weird because he was quieter than he has been in a while in this game. I'll quick pull up the game log here from his last several, but I thought he was good again. He was the only other Timberwolves player to be a positive plus minus for whatever that's worth, but put up a 10.5 rebound, 4 assist stat line in just 32 minutes. And again, quiet, but solid. 4 of 8 shooting, 1 of 3 outside the arc, had a nice 3-point play. We look at his game log here, and I mean, I guess the Boston game Friday, he was really quiet. But before that, he went on that run where he had at least 3 made threes in 4 straight games. Friday in Boston, extremely quiet game, 2 points, 2 rebounds, but now kind of right in the middle. This is more in line with what I would expect him to be, right? He had that run of 4 straight games of 3 or more made threes. He was shooting like 60% from 3 and like 80 from the field. It didn't make any sense. He had 2 20-plus point games, came crashing back to earth with a bad performance in Boston. But this is right in line with what you'd expect from role player Austin Rivers, 10, 5, and 4 with 1 made 3, 4 of 8 shooting, solid defense, like just kind of a measured performance. We saw that. And in a game where so many guys struggled defensively, especially, that was really good to see. On the flip side of the ledger, duds, I'm going to name 2. One has to be Jalen Noel. I know he had 6 assists, no turnovers, but he continues to struggle shooting the ball when they need him really badly, right? When they have D'Lo having these off nights, like he had those bad shooting nights here the last couple times out, this game turned the ball over a bunch, Ant turned it over a lot. They need Jalen to make the most of his minutes, and he only played 20 minutes off the bench in this game when they needed some scoring. 5 points on 2 of 7 shooting, 1 of 2 outside the arc. Missed his free throw attempt on that on an and one opportunity. 6 assists, 3 rebounds, no turnovers, but in general, this was a disappointing Noel performance, in my opinion. I'm also going to give D'Lo one. And I know D'Lo stands will come after me again. That happens sometimes. 13 and 8, 5 of 11 shooting, 3 of 8 outside the arc. The efficiency was okay. Didn't get to the line. The only starter to not get to the free throw line. In fact, the only player besides Matt Ryan and Bryn Forbes, 2 basically strictly spot-up shooters, to not get to the free throw line for the Wolves. 8 assists to 5 turnovers. And again, of those 5 turnovers, I think 4 of them were live ball. I think 1 might have been thrown out of bounds. The other 4 were all just brutal turnovers. And I already, panned Ant for those mistakes too. But I thought D'Lo's were more damaging, and this was just a disappointing performance against a team that he should have done. Like, I know Kyle Lowry's a good player still, but Max Strus and Tyler, I don't know. You just got to have a better game than this if you're D'Angelo Russell. And I think we've kind of crashed back the other direction after that strong stretch for D'Lo. Ant's game, I didn't go into much detail on that, but 29, 7, and 6 sounds real nice. 2 steals and a block. But the 8 turnovers, he made 5 threes, but he only got to the line 3 times in this game. What was he? 6 of 8 inside the arc, 5 of 8 outside the arc for Ant. So without the turnovers, I thought defensively it was up and down for him too. I don't know that he was as locked in as we've seen him recently, but I don't know. Just the turnovers undo so much of what Ant did positively otherwise. And that's why he doesn't get a stud or a dud in this one. All right. That's all we have for you today. There's not much else to say about this. This is really disappointing. And now kind of this murderer's row of opponents. We go at New Orleans Wednesday, following that up with at Milwaukee on Friday. Milwaukee just got beat by 20 plus by the Celtics on Christmas Day, but still one of the best teams in the league. And then you think things get a bit easier. You go home to take on the Pistons, but that's the second half of that back-to-back on Saturday. So a road in Milwaukee, home against Detroit Saturday, back-to-back. You get Sunday off, New Year's Day off, and then Denver on Monday. That's a home game. You go Denver, Portland, Clippers. So it doesn't get much easier. And then you finally get Houston and Detroit with a couple days off in between. But now we're into the second week of January. And more likely than not, Cat's still not going to be back at that point. Who knows about Torian Prince, Jordan McLaughlin? Somehow the Wolves have to try and find a way to steal one of these 2 road games, because otherwise you're 16 and 20 going home for that back-to-back against Detroit. And then things get a bit dicey. You don't want to be too far below that 500 mark in a Western Conference that's, frankly, it's only going to get better, right? Golden State's going to get healthier. Some of these teams will just simply continue to improve. And it's been jumbled for a while. We've talked about that on the show, but it's not going to be jumbled forever. And the Wolves have to start picking up some of these wins against shorthanded teams like a Miami. Remember, they did that early in the year. That's kind of how they stayed afloat, was beating these shorthanded teams. The last time they beat Miami, when they beat Philadelphia, right? When they beat Cleveland, those were all shorthanded wins. And now you can't beat shorthanded Miami. You struggle against a struggling Dallas team last Wednesday when they should have won their 4th in a row. This stuff can't keep happening for Minnesota. But anyway, that's at New Orleans Wednesday, at Milwaukee Friday. It's going to be a difficult week. We'll, of course, do the live postcast with Marnie following both of those games, as we do after each and every game. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel to catch those live. We also post those postcasts as episodes on the Locked On Wolves audio feeds. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. It's absolutely appreciated. You can watch on YouTube. You can also listen on any of your favorite audio platforms. You can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, you can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that your second listen can be our Locked On Sports Today podcast. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in just 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.